Podcast, forward spine and sport, podcast.
This is episode 2 of the Forward Spine and Sport podcast. In this episode, Brian talks about training adaptation. He'll cover why improvement doesn't happen week to week the way most people expect, how your body actually adapts over time, and how to tell if you're getting better, overdoing it, or just being impatient. Let's get into it.
Welcome back, Forward Fam, to episode 2 of the Forward Spine and Sport podcast. Thank you to the 75 of you who listened on YouTube last week and the 5 of you who listened on Spotify. It was 6, but I was one of them. So I think we can only count that for 5. But hell yeah, we're doing this. We're getting good feedback, so we're excited to have you here. Last week we were talking about the 10% rule with specific to adding running mileage, specifically not exceeding 10%. And so if you have questions, you have comments, throw them in wherever there's a chat, wherever you're catching your catching these podcasts. And if you have a topic you would like us to cover, also you can send us a DM on Instagram at Forward Spine and Sport. You can put a comment in one of our other episodes, and we will shoot it if I know anything about it, or if I can learn something about it. This week, we are kind of segueing, piggybacking a little bit off episode 1, and we are still talking in the realm of training or like fitness, so to speak, right? And today we're talking specifically about training adaptation, expectations versus reality, right? This is another really important topic across any activity that you have an expectation of getting better at. It doesn't matter if it's running, weightlifting, F45, Orange Theory, downhill skiing. The application of improvement has timelines that, as individuals who are expecting to improve, if we have a better understanding of what a reasonable timeline is for certain adaptations, we are going to have a much more positive experience around that, so that we understand, is our body doing what it's supposed to? Am I overtraining? Am I undertraining? And we're going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit with some of those things. And so when it comes to adaptation, we want to kind of define different types of adaptation that we should expect. I'm going to use running for an example here, but the application is pretty universal. I past couple of years have been cross-country skiing and rock climbing, and so I also may reference those sports as well, but it would apply to strength training or really anything. And so the first thing is in running, and since it's Boston Marathon season, we can use that as kind of our kind of backdrop for this. We have this expectation that we will see improvement week over week, right? And week over week, meaning like Monday to Friday, week 1, Monday to Sunday, week 1, Monday to Sunday, week 2. And what's nice about run training is it's often repetitive, right? And so you're doing a long run every week. You might be doing a track workout every week. You might be doing a tempo run or a fartlek or hills or whatever. And so tracking progress can be pretty easy, and you can feel the difference, right? Whether that means you're running faster, you're feeling more efficient on something. If it's a strength training thing, you're picking up more weight, right? So when it comes to that expectation, our expectation is every week we're getting better. And in some circumstances that may be true, and in some circumstances that may be not true. And so I want to separate a little bit from the kind of the aspects of what we are looking for as far as improvement, or what system of the body we are expecting improvement from, and what kind of timeline that falls under. And so the first one is neurological, right? And so when it comes to running, there is a neurologic pattern in which our brain fires at to allow us to move through space, right? And this pattern, also known as a motor pattern, that's a more clinical term, but the kind of colloquial term is muscle memory, right? That muscle memory is influenced by our age, our sport background, our general physical preparedness, right? In our first episode, we talked about the difference between a seasoned athlete and kind of your like, I'm new to running athlete, and how there are definitive neurologic differences in those people whose brain is more used to adapting and who can learn faster. And so when we're talking about neurologic adaptation, one of the things that we will see is a very rapid rate of improvement when it comes to efficiency of movement execution, right? So let's take hills for an example, right? When you run uphill, you are using a much more explosive pattern of running, right? Because you're going against gravity. And so the demand on the system is higher. When the demand on your motor system is higher, you get what's called more motor unit recruitment. What that means is when you're running down the street, conversational, easy pace, your brain says, I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this, but I need to spare calories. And so I'm not going to fire up all my muscles as hard as I can just to jog down the street in case I have to do it for a while. Unless you are outrunning a bear all of a sudden, in which case your brain is going to shift into overdrive and it's going to fire everything it has with as much velocity as possible. And so what happens is different neurologic mechanisms are at play here, both the rate of neural firing and kind of the ability to fire it in succession, right? And that is a skill that the brain develops, right? And so when you're running flat, your brain's like, I'm going to be as lazy as possible. And so I'm going to send less recruitment signal to less motor units at the laziest or weakest frequency I can. Weakest frequency is not inherently accurate. There's a principle in neurology called it fires or it doesn't, right? And so there's no grading of how intense an electrical signal is. It either fires or it doesn't. It's more about the succession of those signals that changes the intensity. So apologies for the kind of deep dive on the neurology. Sometimes I just get too far into the weeds, but hey, that's why you're here, right? So when we run uphill, brain goes, this is a harder demand thing. I am going to meet that demand. And so what happens is I'm going to recruit more motor units and I'm going to fire more successively to achieve that goal, right? And so the first time you do that, it's like, whoa, that was really hard. The second time you do that, it probably feels the same. It isn't until you have started to do this repetitively once or twice a week where your brain goes, okay, we are getting this repetitive stress signal. We need to adapt. Okay, we are going to basically learn how to recruit more motor fibers and how to send those signals faster. And so that process can happen very, very quickly. It's not going to happen in the first time you do a workout, but when it comes to the neurologic side of training adaptation, that is actually usually the first thing that's happening and the reason why the beginning of training usually feels so good. And it's usually the first 4, 6, 8 weeks of a new activity where you are going to see this really rapid rate of improvement. And that rate of improvement is due to the fact that the brain is just getting better at that activity. It's getting more efficient and you're just kind of coming along for the ride, right? And so the higher the skill is in an activity, usually that's more like the rate of change. So for example, I said I'm cross-country skiing. It's a very skill and technique-based sport. And so if your technique on skis and slippery surfaces is really inefficient, you don't go very fast and you use a lot of energy because you don't know what the hell you're doing. But once you learn the technique, you start to be able to see the difference in your speed and your distance, and also your energy output from a cardiovascular standpoint goes down as your speed and distance are going up. And that, in the beginning, those first times, that's neurological. I took to dive a little deeper. I took a lesson as an adult. I took a skiing lesson, which was very humbling, but I highly recommend. And I could see in a 2-day period my efficiency change. Like it was overnight. I was a better skier on day 2 than I was on day 1, and it's because I learned the pattern. It had nothing to do with my cardiovascular system or my muscles. It was all neurological, and so that is usually what we feel in the beginning, which is going to lead us to our kind of more long-term training adaptations. Again, we're using running, but this applies to almost anything, is the cellular level of adaptation. And now this is where it gets really helpful to understand that this process takes a lot of time, a lot of consistency, a lot of repetition, and rest. So part 1 is neurologic adaptation. Part 2 is more of the cellular adaptation level. And again, if we're talking running, we are talking mostly about the cardiovascular system and the muscular system. And the things that we are looking for that are going to make us better runners are going to be increases in the number of red blood cells that we have in circulation at any one time, increase in the density of capillaries, that's like little baby blood vessels, over your muscle fibers. The more capillary density you have, the more oxygen you can deliver to muscles. Oxygen is the number 1 factor for an endurance athlete of how fast you can run with the limited supply of both carbohydrate and oxygen. You're also talking about increases in the thickness of your muscle fibers. If you have more thickness in your muscle fibers, they can squeeze harder. And so these are cellular changes, right? In the brain, we're talking about kind of like synaptic, right? And so nothing inherently needs to grow or break down and regrow when you're talking neurologic change. When you're talking cellular change, you have a process called cell turnover. And so let's take, what's a good example? Let's take red blood cells, okay? So when you go for your first run and you go out too hard and you're huffing and puffing and you have to stop and your legs are burning, that is because the demand you put on the system exceeded how much oxygen you could deliver to your muscles. You went over it, you stayed above it, and eventually it led to, for lack of a better term, failure, where you had to stop, right? Because you were creating lactic acid, which is a buffer that happens when you are not getting enough oxygen demand, or you're not getting enough oxygen to meet the demand. And when that accumulates, your muscles and your neurology are just really hampered by that acid, because it's not a very happy environment for cells to live in. And so there's this very quick decline in your ability to output, right? So you do that one time and nothing changes. You go out for your next run, kind of feels the same. You go out for your next run, still kind of feels the same. It isn't until that you have started to accumulate this repetitive stress process that the internal signaling system of your body starts to say, hey, we need to adapt because this stressor keeps happening. We keep getting the hormone signals from it. We keep getting the neurotransmitter signals from it. We need to meet the demands that our human is placing on us. It actually is the most incredible process, and human beings are such adaptable creatures. That being said, your body doesn't inherently have an agenda to say, we want to be a marathoner, or we want to do an Ironman, or we want to pick up that weight. Like, it's just not really coded into our DNA to say, hey, we're going to do recreational sports because it's fun. It actually goes against our genetics. Like, our bodies are inherently driven to do as little as possible. If we think about what your brain's priorities are, it's survival and procreation of the species, which sounds crass, but it is the reality of it. And that is not a comment at all on my thoughts if people should be having children or not. You do you, boo-boo. But that's how our brains are hardwired, right? And so when you throw something at it like endurance training, it's a waste of calories, it's a waste of time, and your brain's like, I don't know, 6-7, just like, I don't really want to do this. I don't know if I used that right, but I did. Karina's really laughing at me, and I feel good about it. So, it isn't until you basically force adaptation on that cellular level that it actually happens, right? And so if I continue to expose myself, back to my original example of red blood cells from 3 hours ago, if I continue to expose my system to not enough oxygen delivery to my muscles, there is a hormone called erythropoietin. That's a synthetic version of it. But essentially what happens is that signals my bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And if I have more red blood cells, I can deliver more oxygen to my system. And so I will produce more red blood cells until it meets the demand. And then we increase the training stimulus, right? So here's where the friction happens, though, is that when you're doing something like a long run, again, running is our kind of frame of reference for today. If you're doing something like a long run, and let's say you ran 9 miles and then 10 miles and then 11 miles and then 12 miles, that for like a new beginner marathoner, that's a pretty typical, like, add a mile a week. We touched a little bit on some of the pros and cons of that in our previous episode. So if you want to understand a little bit more about that, you can reference that episode. But a more aggressive one that I have seen with even beginner marathoners or more intermediate marathoners would be like 10, 12, 14, 16 over a 4 or 5 week period, right? Which is, if you went from 10 to 15 in 4 weeks, that's a 50% improvement, right? That's a pretty extraordinary adaptation when you put it in the context of, I improved 50% in 4 weeks. And this is where me as a clinician, and I think other clinicians should start asking themselves is, are we actually adapted to meet that stimulus, or are we exceeding our capacity to continue to stimulate these changes? And is our rate of change too much? And here's a little bit where the overlap from last week of the 10% rule, and this is a little bit more context, is that in reality, cellular turnover, like what we're talking about, happens in this 3 to 4 or 5 week cycle where you need concurrent, similar and tolerated stimulus in order for your body to kind of level up. And so what happens is you're kind of on this level playing field, flat line as far as improvement. If you're listening, it's just, a flat line on a graph. And then what happens is as those stimulus accumulate, you level up. And then you kind of are in like a flat line again, right? And so the hardest part about this is if we have the expectation that I'm getting better or having better endurance or having higher red blood cell count or whatever it is we're thinking about week over week, the reality is you're actually in a lag period pretty much all the time. One thing that is done really well in marathon training, for the most part, as a community rule or rule of thumb, and if you know anything about me and you've worked with me, I hate these, but this one's actually pretty good. And it's that towards the end of your marathon training cycle, pretty much everybody stops training or decreases training volume pretty significantly 3 weeks out from the marathon. Why? Because cellular processes take 3 to 4 weeks. And whether or not as a community, we just came to the conclusion that if you don't taper for long enough, you're actually going to enter the race tired, versus, you're actually in that 3 week period, you're boosting red cell blood volume, you're boosting capillary density, all these things that are going to make you faster on race day. I don't know if that's how that happened, right? But it was an observation that people who don't rest enough leading up to the marathon don't have a good race day. And so this kind of commonality of 3 weeks is kind of what we've set on. And coincidentally, 3 to 4 weeks is about how long it takes for cellular turnover to occur in many different systems in our body. Since we only have like 100 listeners, no one's going to talk shit to me about the specifics of how long a red blood cell lives or how long it takes for myofibril to turn over. And to be honest with you, I don't know the exact numbers, right? So I can look them up though. So if you want to come at me, bro, that's cool. And so why is this useful for you, right? It's useful for you because you can level set your expectations that when you go out on a 15-mile run, you can look back 3 weeks and say, okay, 3 weeks ago, I ran 11 miles. So my expectation is that 11 miles is going to go pretty well, right? Even 12, maybe 13 is going to go pretty well. But what I'm really going for is understanding that if I'm getting to a place in this 15-mile run where I am no longer kind of meeting my demand and I just feel like shit, I don't know if I should curse on this podcast. I don't even know. We're going to curse on this podcast. I curse in the clinic, so whatever. So I feel like shit. It's time to pull the plug because you're probably overdoing it way more than you need to, right? One of the things we suck at as human beings is listening to our body, especially when you put a goal in there and you're like, nope, my body doesn't know shit. My body is just like mixed messages, right? It's like being on a bad date. You're just like, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not listening to any of this, right? But in reality, your body gives you signals. And especially when these things start to accumulate as you're over stressing, there definitely is a point where it's not beneficial. And so we as a community need to be better about being flexible in our training to be like, hey, I'm looking at this and today my body is not tolerating this. And it's giving me the signals to say, this is probably overreaching more than is going to benefit you. And so it's time to pull the plug on this workout, reevaluate, and see where I am again when this similar workout or distance comes up to say, okay, last time when I tried to run 15, I made it to 13 and I had to stop because of whatever reason. Oh, today I made it to 14. Okay, cool. That doesn't mean you're ready for 17. It means that you need to keep your stimulus within a more reachable number. And again, this is where we run into trouble because on the training plan, it says, oh, I'm supposed to run 18. And if I can't run 18, I'm not going to run the marathon. That's actually not what it means. It means that 18 is your goal stimulus. But if you can't recover from that stimulus because it just put you so far into debt, then that stimulus is inappropriate and actually not going to benefit you. Now, I know what you're thinking because I can read minds. It's a special chiropractic power you develop in school where through podcasts, I can tell what you're thinking. It was a joke for anyone who didn't think that was funny. Anyways, how do I know if I'm adapted or not? It's a nuanced question. You're going to probably hear me say that a lot. You also may hear me say a lot, yes, no, and it depends. And so what we want to try and help understand are like signs that you're adapting. This science is complicated, right? If we had an XBiz lab, we could be much more clear on certain things by measuring, blood volume and lactate and there are runners who are already doing these sorts of things. It's really cool. But for the muggles among us who don't want to buy a lactate meter, myself included, I have no desire to prick my finger every workout. It's stupid. Here are some ways that you can say, okay, I'm getting better. The first one is something called RPE, and that's rating of perceived exertion. RPE is a subjective scale, meaning your RPE is yours and it's nobody else's because I'm the subject, right? So when you're doing let's say, your first 10 miler. You're going to rate it on how difficult it was based on your life experience, right? You may rate that at a 8 or 9 out of 10, one of the hardest things you've ever done. And I think that would be very normal if you've never run 10 miles before, that it would feel very high as far as my rating of how hard that was. You may even be being like, oh my God, how the hell am I going to run 26 miles? Well, you'll get there. If you're in the middle of a training block for a marathon, you've never done it, it's amazing, because at some point you're going to run that 10 miles again and you're going to go, oh, that was doable. You might even say that was easy, in which case you might be a little bit of a sociopath, but welcome to the club. So when your perception of training is reducing for similar repetitive workouts, doesn't matter if it's hills or the long run or just your day-to-day run, as you're feeling like things are getting easier, they probably are, right? And so you can trust your body to give you those signals of, hey, I'm doing better at this, right? That's a good positive feedback. And again, you may feel that with some neurologic benefits. You also may be feeling that from the cellular level. Another way is time. If you're doing the same type of workout or the same run, you can say, oh, I'm getting faster. However, there's a little double-edged sword there. Humans, we're weird. And if you're doing the same thing all the time, there will be a tendency to try and beat yourself. I don't know why we do this. We do. I do it all the time. And running it faster doesn't necessarily mean you're improving. So that's a little bit difficult. So it feels like a very objective measure. However, when it's small variables, there's enough variability in how you're going to feel on any given day where you may run, a 5-mile loop a minute slower or a minute faster, but your physiology is the same, right? And so I would hesitate to say you should be timing and you should always be getting faster, because that is a really quick way to lead to overtraining. So I would be very hesitant to say that that is a good model. I think for most of us, the RPE, the perceived exertion, is a good enough guide. That being said, your body will talk to you. If you are overtraining, you're going to start to notice it. Some signs of overtraining would be weight loss, trouble sleeping, disinterest in the work you're doing, whether that be running or life, mood changes. These are all signs that your system is just being so stressed that it can't function properly, right? Insomnia or not being able to get out of bed, right? Your body does talk to you on a daily basis. We just tend to ignore it because we don't find the data very useful. And so if you're feeling like things just aren't right, you could be overtraining. And that also could be a time to maybe go get some blood work. Simple things like iron and anemia and things like that often don't show themselves until we have a high demand for them. So it's kind of one of those things when you know, which isn't that helpful. But as you are improving, you will kind of see the positive feedback signs. And if you are not improving, you will likely see the negative feedback signs as well. All right, I've been rambling for quite a while now, talking to myself, which actually probably says, I don't know, good things, bad things about me, that I can just have a conversation with myself for, 40 minutes. Whatever. Here we are. Takeaways. So the first thing is we want to normalize that not every week's going to be a good week, right? And that's okay, right? That's part of it. When you're stimulating your body, sometimes you fall behind the 8 ball a little bit and you're not going to meet your expectations. That's totally fine. It's totally normal. It's going to happen. Take a deep breath, give it a week, recheck in with yourself. I'm sure you're going to kind of hit that next level. That's number one. Number two, we want to think about our training in these like 3 to 4 week segments where within these 3 to 4 weeks, we're not having these massive, drastic changes that we're not going to be able to adapt to. So you want to pay attention, mildly, where you're like, checking in with your RPE, things like that, where you're just like kind of doing a baseline check-in, like, how am I doing today, right? And make sure that we're not falling off the back of a train. But we don't want to look at every single workout and be like, did I get better? Did it get better? Did it get better? Because running is going to get real frustrating, or any sport for that matter. It's going to get real frustrating if you're always trying to just go as hard as you can, because you will reach a point where you stop improving, and you may reach a point where you actually start to get worse because you are just overloading your system and it is crashing. So 3 to 4 week blocks is where we want to see it. When I say think about things in these kind of like 3 to 4 week training blocks, a good visual representation for that is like a step, going up steps. And that every 3 to 4 weeks, I am slowly but surely moving my way to that next step. And that could be distance, that could be intensity, that could be, again, the application we're talking about is running, but it could be weight if you're a lifter. And so I'm very slowly making micro adjustments over that 3 to 4 weeks, if adjustments at all, so that when I try and step up to the next thing, I'm more prepared for it, right? And then the biggest takeaway here is that consistency is the thing, right? And it's consistency of what's doable, right? You want to be finishing your training on a regular basis, feeling like I could do one more. One of the pitfalls that we always do as athletes or as human beings is like, I got one more in me, right? But if that one more means you're flat on your back and you're dragging ass for 3 days, that wasn't a very useful endeavor. You want to be finishing with just a little bit in the tank. And the more I've worked with all levels of athletes, it's that I find that typically it's our seasoned veterans who have learned this and understand that, like, not every day you're going to send it and you're going to go for it. You're going to have consistency over time and give your body a reasonable amount of stimulus, which probably means a little bit less than you want, so that and a reasonable amount of time, which is going to be a lot more than you want it to be. But that's where you're going to really find your adaptation. Is it's not over days, it's not over weeks, it's over months and months and months. And that level of commitment is where you are going to find the most success, which also is complicated and difficult. And so we have to find harmony in between these things of like, how hard can I go versus what's reasonable for my body. My final note for today, too long, don't read. Consistency, 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 patience, patience, patience. Most people do not struggle with the consistency, they struggle with the patience. This is just the reality of the situation. And the sooner you deal with that reality, you are going to find ease in your training, because you're not going to feel like you're jamming a square peg into a round hole. Happy training out there, folks. Thank you for joining us. Questions, comments, hit us up. Have a great run. TLDR, too long, don't read.
Yeah.
You want me to explain that?
No.
Oh. Too long, don't read. Don't listen to the whole fucking episode. Just like be consistent and be patient. You greedy little.
Thanks for listening to the Forward Spine and Sport podcast. If this episode has been helpful, send it to a friend, subscribe to our feed, or find us on social media at Forward Spine and Sport. If you're in the Boston area and you need some help, come see us. We're here for you.